Welcome everybody to this Brimbank Writers and Readers Festival event. Thank you for attending this afternoon and being part of the 17th annual Brimbank Writers and Readers Festival. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people as the traditional custodians of the land on which our municipality sits. Council recognises the diversity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who contribute to our community, and we pay our respects to the wisdom of elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge our festival sponsors for the Brimbank Readers and Writers Festival, principal sponsor Victoria University Polytechnic, and support sponsor Borrowbox for their support in making these types of events a reality for our community. So, welcome to We've Got This, the panel. This is a new anthology featuring 25 parents who identify as deaf, disabled or chronically ill, where they discuss the highs and lows of parenting journeys and reveal that the greatest obstacle lie in other people's attitudes. More than 15% of Australian households have a parent with a disability, yet their stories are rarely shared and their experiences almost never reflected in parenting literature. So tonight we're hearing from editor Eliza Hull, Jacki Brown and Sam Drummond as they discuss their journey. And Eliza, I'll hand over to you now to introduce our panel.
Hi everyone, well thank you so much for having us. It's very exciting to be here. Firstly, I'd like to begin by just saying my pronouns. My pronouns are she, her, and image description also. I'm wearing a stripy black and white top, and I have my hair up in a bun. I've got brown hair and I have fair skin, and behind me I have white cupboards. So our panelists today are Sam Drummond and Jacki Brown, which is very exciting. They are two of the contributors to We've Got This. And it's, a real thrill to have you both. So welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Amazing to be here. Thanks, Eliza.
So just to give both of them a quick little introduction, Jacki Brown is a disability and LGBTIQA+ rights activist, writer and educator. Jax's work has been published in Queer Disability Anthology in 2015. Queer Stories, Reflections on Lives Well Lived from some of Australia's finest LGBTIQA+ writers. Kindred, 12 queer #love Oz YA stories in 2019, and Growing Up Queer in Australia also in 2019. Jax is interested in how we can build resilience, pride and community for disabled people. And Sam Drummond is a lawyer and disability advocate. He's worked in community, commercial and public broadcasting and written extensively on disability rights. Sam lives in Melbourne's north with his partner and child. He can often be found swimming laps in Fitzroy Pool, which is great. Sam, I might start with you and then I'll go to Jax. Just Sam, whether you could just state your pronouns and also give us an image description of yourself.
Yeah, he, him, his. I'm wearing a t-shirt today. I've got light brown hair that's quite short, bit of stubble and round glasses. And this has been my look since the start of COVID.
Nothing wrong with it. And Jax, would you mind just stating your pronouns and giving us an image description?
Sure. I'm a fabulous queer and I'm non-binary, so my pronouns are they and them. I'm a white settler in my late 30s and I have short dark hair which my girlfriend cuts for me, so I'm living the queer dream. And I'm wearing glasses and a black t-shirt with some stars and a planet situation that you might see pop up from time to time.
Great. Well, yeah, we are here to speak about We've Got This, Stories by Disabled Parents. I'm the editor and as we stated, Sam and Jax are two of the contributors. There's 25 stories within this book of parents that identify as having a disability or parents that are deaf or having chronic illness. The book idea was due to lack of representation of disabled parents. When I was pregnant with my first child, I really just couldn't find anything out there that represented parenting with disability accurately and authentically. And I was seeking a book like this. So it's so great that it's out. I wanted to first start with you, Sam. I was curious, had you always wanted to be a parent, or was it something that you felt you had decided later in life?
I was quite neutral on parenting. It was never something. I think some people are the sort of people where they grow up wanting to be a parent. It was never something that I desperately wanted. And if people asked me, I think my go-to answer was no. I met my partner, Joe. I had to put a date on it today, and I couldn't remember, but around about 10 years ago. She didn't want kids at that stage in her life, and had made that very known to her family. And so we just didn't talk about it for a long time. My form of disability is called pseudoachondroplasia. It's a form of dwarfism that impacts the growth of my bones and the health of my joints. And when Jo went on long service leave, I went with her, and we went for a trip through Southeast Asia. And walking has always been pretty tough for me, but there was one walk in particular in Penang that we did where I just completely overdid it. And I sort of, after that, I really had to pain manage to get through the trip, but was committed to going through the whole, getting to the end. I actually, as a side note, got some x-rays done this month where my GP said, "You've got a historical fracture in your right femur." And I'm like, I know when that happened. So that's the sort of injury that I did to myself. And it was the sort of injury that makes you reassess your priorities. And so when we came back, I decided that it was time to have that chat and make a decision one way or the other. That we're both getting to an age where we had to make that decision. And there are a lot of assumptions, I think, that we were both making about each other's position, and a lot of it centered around disability. So I have a 1 in 2 chance of passing my disability on to any kids of mine. And I think what we realized was that we were letting society's expectations of what a disabled person should do dictate our decision on that. And that wasn't the way that we wanted to live our lives, and that we wanted to make the most of every moment and achieve the things that were really important to us. And so we were really, we went on a journey of trying to get pregnant that took quite a while. It's interesting reading Jax's contribution as well, because and I think a lot of parents have these ups and downs, particularly when IVF is involved, and getting that test that comes up positive is just this incredible moment where it really, all that there is you and your partner. That was a really special moment. We welcomed our daughter to the world in December 2019, And so she's two now, and her life has been defined by a pandemic, but it's been absolutely beautiful.
When you speak about, I guess, the wider societal assumptions about parenting, when you were considering having a child, what are those society?
Yeah.
What do you think they are, and where do you think they come from?
There are a lot of assumptions, and I'd like to hear from Jax on this as well, but I think essentially it is that we are a burden, that if we have a disability that is genetic and you can pass it on, that you are doing something that's irresponsible. We had a situation when we were pregnant and we were getting one of the scans, and the scanning dude, I know he has a name, but I'm not a doctor. So he I walked into the room and he was scanning my partner, and he looked at me and he said, he started talking about my parents, and I said that my parents are able-bodied, and he said, oh, good, so it's not genetic, you can't pass it on then. And I said, no, you can. I have a 1 in 2 chance of passing this on. And he looked at my partner and he said, oh, I'm sorry. And that's the sort of situation that we confront every day. There's this assumption that it's a bad thing, that disability is a bad thing. And I think one of the opportunities of this book is to show that actually we really value it. And in fact, it's a beautiful part of human diversity. And it's something that we need to value more in our society. And passing it on to a child is society's problem, it's not our problem. We need to make sure that the barriers that society puts up for people with disabilities are minimized, because that there is the problem, is this idea that that disability is a burden on society, when actually society is a burden on people with disabilities.
Totally agree. Jax, would you mind speaking to this as well? Why do you think people do hold these assumptions? I think it definitely happens with disability, but I think it's even more prevalent when it comes to being a parent with disability. Why do you think? Yeah,
I mean, that was so wonderfully articulate, and there was so much in your answer there, Sam, that that I've experienced in different ways, and I agree with. So thanks for that excellent answer and that excellent framing. I think the only kind of thing I would add in there is that there's also this assumption that we're going to be not very good parents, that we're going to not be able to do the right or correct or normal kind of things for our children, or normal parenting, that we're going to kind of be insufficient in some way, or at the other end of that, those assumptions and spectrums kind of damage our child by not being able to do things in a kind of normal way. And I think all that kind of thinking is, of course, ableist and full of ableist assumptions. But I mean, particularly when we were trying for our daughter, we came up against a lot of that through the medical profession, through friends and family, kind of saying, well, how will you care for this child? How will you carry a small baby that can't support their head? When she was really little, how will you change a nappy? What will the physicality of parenting look like for you? And of course, like any kind of first time parent who's never done some of that stuff with a tiny baby, I didn't have those answers until I was in relationship with my tiny child and working it out and asking other disabled people, oh, what did you do when, your baby was under 3 months old and you were trying to work out how to wheel along safely with this little kid? How did you change your nappy? What did you use? Did you find a change table that was able to be adjusted to your height? You know, and I feel like because and this is what speaks to the power of this book, I think, because there is so few representations of the ingenious ways that disabled parents find ways to parent and find ways to parent that are safe and that also support the diversity of our bodies and minds and celebrate that in our parenting. Often for first-time parents with disabilities, we're not able to answer those kind of questions about how are you going to do this? What does it look like? Until we're in it. And I think that that's the beauty of these stories in this book, is it shows some of the ways you can do it, some of the different ways you can think outside the box, and what that looks like. And it'll show people that are thinking about becoming parents, that some of those questions have been answered by people that have come before you, and perhaps you'll figure out your own wonderful different ways of doing it for yourself and your body and in relationship with your kid, and you'll be able to speak back to some of those assumptions.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it, and that what this book has done for me is that it seems like every contributor has thought a lot about it, and it makes me realize that no parent actually knows what they're doing, like whether they're disabled or not. But there's no questioning of particularly straight white couples who have a kid. There's no questioning of whether they should have a kid, but then it falls onto us in a particularly medicalized pregnancy period and the birth has become highly medicalized for anyone. And so you're given all these measurements that put you within a normal or an abnormal range, that word that Jack's used. And for people with disabilities, that can be pretty confronting, really, because we've spent our whole life being medicalized and saying that we're not normal. And then suddenly it's been thrown right back at us in the most personal way that you can possibly have it during the pregnancy and a birth of a child.
It's so true, though, that nobody knows what they're doing. Like, I remember just when I brought my first baby back, I just looked at my partner and I said, how do you do this? So I think especially, you know, when we're thinking about parents with intellectual disability, it's unbelievable that we send parents off on their way just to, you know, without any support in place, without any education in place. I think that's really highlighted in the book when Jacqueline and Gary, who are parents with intellectual disability, and also Heather Smith, who says that, you know, they weren't given any education, they weren't given any supports. And in fact, they were just stigmatized and discriminated so much that as soon as they were given any sort of help that they really had to seek out, straight away, child protection is called, instead of like, how do we actually support these parents? So I think that is a huge issue, and it's unbelievable that we expect that any parent actually should have to do it on their own, and especially for parents with intellectual disability. So Jax, I wondered for you, what was it like going through the IVF system or space? I guess it is a system in a way.
Yeah.
Was that hard as a disabled person?
Yeah, and I explore this in my chapter. It was really hard, and I think, as Sam says, when it's something as personal as trying to have a baby, and you know, all the wonder of that decision and that choice and hope that's tied to that idea of becoming a parent and getting to have a little person in your life. And then as a proud political disabled person to enter a medicalised industry, that right from the time that we went to the information night at our clinic, there was assumptions about me and my body and my capacity to parent a child, but also this idea that we should be testing. We should be testing our embryos. We should be testing ourselves for disabilities, and that we should be screening that out if we found anything to be kind of abnormal. And that thread of ableism went throughout the whole pregnancy. Like we refused scans, we refused measurements, but it just occurred. Every time we would go in, they would just start measuring and going, oh, things look normal, it's fine. Or they've got all their fingers and toes, they don't have markers for Down syndrome or spina bifida. And we'd be going, whoa, we've like opted out, we've told you we didn't want to know this, stop talking to us about it. And even to the point of like when my partner was literally in the delivery room in labour, a nurse, a midwife coming in and going, oh, I've noticed on your chart that you haven't tested for Down syndrome. People don't make that choice anymore. Everyone tests. Why haven't you tested for this? And feeling like at every point when we just wanted to tune into each other and tune into this baby and be excited and, scared as well, that we were having to justify why we didn't want to know if they had a disability at that point, and why, if the child was born and we found out that they did, why were we going to celebrate that? And so there was this kind of very negative disability as burden, disability as deficit, disability as something that should be screened for and eliminated if found. Interaction that happened throughout the pregnancy. And I really did wonder, as a visibly disabled person, if I had chosen to carry our child, so we used my egg in my partner's womb, but if it was my visibly disabled body that was pregnant in this situation, what additional comments and judgment and pressure might I come under for potentially choosing to bring, another disabled life into the world with this disabled body? So I think there's an extra kind of level of ableism that disabled parents come under from the medical profession. It should have been a time of joy and anticipation, and instead, often when we went to these appointments, it was a time of feeling like we had to steady ourselves and hold on to our perspectives and our politics around the choices that we were making, and try and do a little bit of education in that room. And I just wanted to be an excited parent, not having to kind of do those extra layers of advocacy. So yeah, it was tough.
I really appreciate that. Sorry, Eliza, but
okay.
I just really appreciate that parenting is political. And it is a political, you can't get around that having a child as a person with a disability is political, because you come up against all those barriers. You come up against that testing, and we opted out of the testing as well, and we're so surprised at how normalized, if I can use that word, testing has become. And it's not just the impact of that on people with a disability who are looking at parenting that I'm worried about. I'm worried about the impact that that's having on able-bodied parents, because they screen out the testing. They do the testing that screens out, and then they will see a person with a disability on the street, and what it makes them see that person as is something that is undesirable, that it creates fear within expectant parents about disability. There is a fear in becoming a parent. My biggest fear was that my child would be a bad person. I think that's a legitimate fear. Like if there was a screening test to screen out Vladimir Putin, I'd have it. But I'm really concerned about the impact that normalization of screening is having on the wider population.
Sam, when you speak about your disability having a genetic component, so that you said that there's a 50% chance that your child would inherit your disability, that was also the case for me. I have a 50% chance. For me, it was quite a big decision, but became actually really easy in the end. Big because I know what the world is like, and it's hard because of having people laugh at me, people staring at me, praying for me on the street. Also, I am in pain and I have fatigue, and I ultimately didn't want that for my child, but I still chose to not screen for my disability, and I still chose to have children because disability is what makes me me, and I wouldn't change it. I'm curious, was it a hard decision for you or something that just felt easy and natural?
This is one of those things that I mentioned before, of people with disability thinking about it and being forced to think about it in a deeper way. And I'm not taking away from able-bodied parents who do a lot of thinking as well, but it's real, you know, the impacts, and for me it was the internalized ableism within me. It made me confront that, because I was thinking, well, what if they have my disability and they experience discrimination at school, or they walk in to get their first job and no one will employ them, or make pretty easy adjustments so they can get employed? Why am I needlessly putting someone through that? And I think it clicked for me when I realized that, no, that's not my problem. To an extent, it is my problem, in that now that I am a parent, it's my responsibility, I see it, as a political being, to reduce those barriers as much as possible. But it's not my daughter's problem. You know, so the rest of society can just get on board and make an accessible world and minimize those barriers so that we can just get on with it. And so once that clicked, it became a really simple question for me to answer.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? And that feeds into physical barriers, but also attitudes and lack of representation. Jax, I'm curious why you think it's really taken this long for a book like this to exist, when disabled people have been parenting for such a long time, and we see so many books about parenting and get given so much advice. Why hasn't this existed?
I mean, I think it's been perhaps that fear of ableism externally for disabled people, that if we explore the complexities of what it means to parent with disability, honestly, that perhaps we're going to get misunderstood or misquoted, or, you know, it is kind of a vulnerable space to explore what it means for us. But I also think it's been seen to be kind of this niche area that, you know, it might be relevant to you, but it's only this tiny pocket of society that might pick up and read and engage with this book. You know, so will it sell, is the kind of question that I guess publishers might have thought about. And, you know, is there enough people out there willing to tell their story? Well, we've definitely shown through this collection that there is. And I think, you know, it's relevant to disabled parents, but it's also relevant to non-disabled people who want to think about, what would it mean for me if I acquired a disability, if I love someone who has a disability and parented alongside them? You know, what does it mean for health professionals, for maternal child health nurses, for obstetricians, like what is that bigger piece of telling our story, and how does that connect in with advocacy and understanding disability as a political human rights issue? Yeah, so I think it's sad that it's taken so long. I wish it had been around before now, but I think the fact that it exists is going to make a huge difference to disabled people, but also to a lot of other folk in society who might pick up this book and learn some things, but also see some similarities between some of the stuff we're going through as parents and some of the stuff, you know, parents just go through anyway. My chapter talks a little bit about the marriage equality debate and the plebiscite, and, you know, navigating my partner's pregnancy at the time when there was a lot of stuff in the media about a lot of homophobic and transphobic stuff about should queer folk be able to parent, and should we be able to adopt, and should we be able to have kids in our life, because what are the negative impacts of not having a, you know, heterosexual cisgendered family dynamic on children. So I was really aware of the parallels between that kind of discourse and that kind of homophobia and transphobia and the ableism that we were also encountering both within the medical profession, but then also the more kind of insidious ableism that you encounter in society as well. When you say you're expecting a baby, like people go, is it a boy or a girl? And then does, you know, is it healthy? Is it well? Does it have all its fingers and toes? You know, they ask these kind of questions that speak to the binary nature of people's assumptions around gender, and then also assumptions around disability as well. So, yeah.
And I think this, by sharing our stories as well, this book is changing all sorts of hearts and minds. And discrimination is allowed to occur when society in general others that group of people. But disability, along with a lot of other things, but disability in particular, crosses every border in Australia, every ocean in the world. I got a message this week from someone on Facebook saying thank you for your story, from Canada, and they had their profile pic was a truck, and so interested, I clicked in, and it was a freedom, Canada's Freedom Rally truck. These are people with nothing in common with my values, really, but it's still a human experience, and this book is that opportunity to talk about that social model of disability across the political spectrum. So I think, Eliza, you've done a great job in collating that.
Thank you. Wow, that's quite curious, isn't it? I wonder. Interesting. Jax, what do you think are the biggest issues facing disabled parents right now and historically?
Yeah, I mean, I think ableism in all its subtle and non-subtle forms, the ways that we think about disability, the ways that we frame it as either a tragedy or an inspiration, you know, these kind of stereotypes of disability that we see still perpetuated in the media that don't allow us to see disability as part of diversity, as part of human variation, as an issue of identity and pride and human rights, and engage with it, engage with the history of the disability rights movement. And, you know, I think we need to see more stories, more own voice stories of people with disabilities from, you know, diverse experiences and backgrounds. And when we start to see those stories being told and those stories being celebrated in the mainstream, I think we'll start to notice that some of the outdated stereotypes mightn't be getting as much airtime as they currently are. So yeah, I think this book and other stories by disabled people as well is part of a push for a bigger, broader social change in terms of how we think about and respond to disability, both in terms of attitudes, but also in terms of thinking about the built environment and the kind of barriers that people with disabilities encounter in our lives, and what does it mean to try and create an accessible and inclusive world. I think, it starts with really listening to the voices of disabled people, and it starts with putting us in positions of power and authority in society so that we can lead and enact some of the changes, the legislative changes, the structural changes, the attitudinal changes that need to occur. I'm so sick of, a focus group kind of approach to consulting diverse communities where we get a voice at the table for, 30 minutes, an hour, and then we've been consulted by government organisations, and then they go off and still continue to create an ableist world. So yeah, I think an engagement with disability rights and the social model, but also a huge cultural shift in how we think about and respond and build an accessible and inclusive world. So just some small
Yes, those little
things there. Yeah. What about you, Sam? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think we're on the same wavelength on so much of this. But particularly for parents, just to highlight that we need to continue this great project of human diversity. That for me is the biggest challenge.
We're going to go to a question that's just come through from Jacki Hagen. Hi, Jacki. Let's read it. So I would like to know how you navigate ableist interactions while out in public when you're with your child or children. When you yourself are dealing with the emotional response, which might be anger or frustration, how do you explain this to your kids? It's a great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll share an interaction that really impacted me this week. I was at the park with my kid, and we're meeting a family that she's also at kindy with. And so we were trying to, become friends with these parents because she's playing with the kid. And the parent said, what's wrong with you? I just need to know, were you born in your wheelchair? Which I find such a weird question, because of course I wasn't literally born in a wheelchair. And so usually in other areas of my life, I might give a witty response to that, or I might, skirt the question or try and do a bit of an educational moment. But I was like, oh, my kid's playing with her kid and I'm at the playground, I kind of tried to respond in a bit of a different way. So I said, oh no, I've had my disability for ages. I've used a wheelchair for years. And then I kind of moved the conversation on. And then 5 minutes later, she said, no, I really need to know what's wrong with you. My husband's a doctor and I need to discuss your body with him tonight. And I was just like, wow, like, why? That's just so forward and so strange, that she needs to kind of discuss me with some kind of medicalized language with her partner. And I said, oh no, like, I don't really need to answer that question. I'm not really interested in that kind of conversation. And then she wanted to know what the condition of a little girl who also goes to the kindy with my child who has a visible disability was. And I said, oh, no, I don't think I'm going to answer that either. Let's go over and see what the kids are doing. But I mean, I tell this story because it really sat with me. Like I went, oh, like, how was I meant to respond to that in a way that would get through to her how inappropriate and what kind of assumptions her question was holding, and the fact that she returned back to the question twice. But also for me, this thing of like, when I'm out with my kid, when I'm interacting with other parents at the park, I don't want to have to switch on being an activist in that moment. I want to be able to be a parent who's trying to make friends with another parent, because our kids maybe will become friends together. So I think it's this hard balance, which I haven't had to navigate before, because I've just always been the outspoken activist, where I want to do an educational piece, but I want to bridge that gap, but I want to do it kind of with a little bit more tact than I probably would have when I was younger. But I also want to let that person know that you can't just rock up to someone and ask them those kind of invasive questions. And she really wanted kind of the medical diagnosis answer. But yeah, it kind of highlighted to me, how do I hold on to my political outspoken activist kind of voice when I'm really positioned in that kind of deficit model, but also in that parenting relationship in that moment. So I'm still kind of puzzling it through, thinking through how to, when someone is full of those assumptions about you and your worth and your body and your medical, the medical language that they're wanting to use, what kind of cuts through that and is pithy enough and is like, you know, one sentence enough that goes, hey, that wasn't okay, here's why, and is able to kind of move the conversation on.
Have you had to explain that yet to your child, Jax?
What, as in what's
like if you've ever faced negative attitudes or discrimination, if you've ever had to speak to your child about it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a little bit. Like she draws my chair all the time, which is lovely, and tells people about my bent legs. But I guess that kind of thing of the assumptions people make about our family, we've kind of more explicitly talked about it in relation to people assume, they always assume I'm the dad and my partner's the mum. And so we've kind of, you know, been talking about, hey, we're a queer family and these are my pronouns, and explicitly talking about that more with her, because I guess that's coming up more in conversation than the disability stuff explicitly at the playground. Yeah.
What about you, Sam?
I think there's something about masculinity here as well, where there is an assumption that masculinity is tied up to height. So the usual day walking down the street with me will have comments from mostly younger kids about, mum, dad, why is that man so small? And I'm sure Gwen picks up on this. I think to answer that question is that I welcome those questions from kids, and it's when, as Jax points out, when it comes from adults, it's more problematic. The way that I approach that is that you're never going to get the perfect answer. You can always just keep trying to work on the answer in different scenarios. And I think this goes to parenting in general, but I really like to debrief with my daughter after an event or at the end of the day, and just talk about how she felt about that. You know, she's 2, so our language is, I think, advanced, but all parents think that. We try to, but that's ableist as well. I talk to her like she's an adult. I go back and say, ask questions like I'd ask an adult. I try to explain things. The other day she said, Sam, little man. And these are the conversations that are going to come up all the time because they're part of our day-to-day experience. And it's just being calm about that, acknowledging that it's going to happen, that you're not going to get it right, and that you can keep talking through the answer.
As a disabled person, I think from my experience, I have to always be thinking about creative ways to fix problems that are created in society. For instance, buildings that I can't get into. So I feel like, in a way, we're almost set up to be great parents because generally we do have to problem solve and be creative thinkers. I wondered whether, one of you or both of you could speak to the creative ways that you have adapted your parenting due to having a disability. Do you want to start, Sam? Or
I was talking to someone who lives near you, Andy Jackson, who was in the Growing Up Disabled in Australia book as well. His was the first chapter, and he used the word disabled ingenuity with me. I really, really liked it. And there are physical things. I need steps up to the nappy table. I can't walk endlessly through the streets while Gwen gets to sleep. It's just about adapting. And some of the things you have to say, well, that wasn't made for me. That cot wasn't made for me. The high chair is difficult for me to move around, and sometimes you've got to say, all right, you talk to your partner and you say, you've got to do this. That becomes problematic in two situations: when neither of you can do it, or you're a single parent. And so I'm in a really fortunate position, I think, that I have a really supportive partner, and I can't imagine doing this alone.
What about you, Jax?
Yeah, I remember when my daughter was pretty little. Should have been probably 3 or 4 months old. And I asked other disabled folks, like, I only had my manual chair at the time because the NDIS hadn't approved me for a power chair at that point, and that's what I use out and about now when parenting her a lot, is my power chair, because it's just easier to hold her on my lap and carry her. And I often think about how would those first 9 months of her life been really different if I'd had the power chair as opposed to just the manual chair at the time, in terms of being able to get out and about together. But I got this thing called a lap baby, which was just like a band that goes around your belly, and another little band that you strap your kid to you, basically. And it was made for like able-bodied women who wanted to be able to sit in cafes and drink their coffee and know that their baby was safely on their lap and not going to fall off, so they could use both their hands to eat their lunch and stuff. But it was great because it meant that I could wheel around with her in my manual chair and, take her out into the backyard and do stuff with her and know that she was safely supported on me, and that I wouldn't have been able to do that without that. So yeah, having kind of access to things like that aren't disability specific as such, because we all know if it's a disability specific piece of equipment, they increase the price so much more. But thinking about, what do I need to be able to do stuff with my kid? Before I had a child, I was all about I'm not going to be that kind of parent that bribes my child to do X, Y, and Z. Like, I'm just going to have firm boundaries and she's just going to listen to me. I'm all about the bribes. I feel like especially when she was a little bit younger, being able to take her to the park, just me and her together for the first time, and feel confident to do that out and about. I was all about, if you go and play nicely with these kids and come back, when I tell you have to go home, you can totally have that chocolate frog. Like, so yeah, I feel like, of course, we learn things as we parent, and sometimes our boundaries and our ideals, who we thought were going to be, kind of shift. But yeah, I feel like at the moment she's kind of really intrigued by the places I can't go because they're not wheelchair accessible, or steps and where's the ramp, and kind of really noticing those things out and about and going, oh, you can't go there, how are we going to get in there, maybe we have to go somewhere else. And like Sam was saying, you know, using that stuff as a kind of opportunity to bring in a bit of the social model, and also have those discussions about, yeah, well, hey, there's things I can't do, and can we think of a way that I might do them differently, or can you just do them with your mum, or like being able to have those explicit conversations about the things that need to change in the world to become more accessible, but also the things that I'm not able to do as a parent with her, and not feeling ashamed about that. I think that's a political act as well, to work through some of that internalized shame, because we're taught to think we should be able to do everything for our kids, and if we need assistance, or if they need to assist us sometimes with things, then we're not, you know, doing things the way that they should be done, but we're just doing things our own way. And we're navigating an ableist world through that, and we're teaching them the lessons of the value of disability, but also the barriers that are put in our way too. And I think having those conversations is really really good.
That was actually,
I was going
to say, but if you want to jump in, Sam, but the next question was leading into that, was just around that. I think a lot of people, especially within the medical system, still see disability as a deficit and negative. But I was curious, in both of your experiences, what disability actually brings to your home, what it provides.
Yeah, this does relate to that, because it relates to the idea of disability pride, and that being proud of my disability doesn't mean the need to do everything that an able-bodied person can do, but acknowledging that there are things that need adjustments. My direct answer to that question, Eliza, is that it brings into this household an appreciation of difference, and a more rounded person is my hope, both for the adults in the house and for the child in the house, that as she grows up, that she will be more empathetic, and you can see that happening already. It is obvious to me that she realizes that everybody has difference, and that is something to be embraced, and that she has a role in making sure that those around her are comfortable in their own skins and allowed to be comfortable. That's what it's bringing to our household. But I'd love to hear from Jax on that as well.
Yeah, I would say that's my hope, and that's what I think I try and impart on our child too. And I also hope that she, and I know that she does, finds the joy in the difference in our family, finds the joy in the different ways that I move and that I experience the world. Like, she loves going out and about on my lap in my power chair. She's almost 4. She's having a birthday on the weekend. But she's currently obsessed with how fast my power chair can go, and we have to go everywhere at top speed and down ramps and up ramps and you know, almost take out a few able boards along the way. But yeah, like I love seeing her joy in my different physicality, and then it's not read as a negative or a deficit or any of those kind of things, but it's just the way me as her parent moves and does things, and that stuff is political and powerful, and it you know, challenges my own ableism when I'm having a moment in myself where I might be feeling self-conscious or whatever or I've encountered some discrimination or whatever, and then I've got this little person who's just so excited to be out and about with me and my chair in the world, exploring it in the ways that we do. So yeah, I think that kind of valuing of difference and really kind of embodying and feeling the different kind of perspectives and physicality that my difference can bring to her experience of the world and her own sense of self. I'm really excited to see that continuing to develop.
Well, I've got one question coming from an audience member. It says, I'm a 29-year-old woman with disability that is 7 months pregnant with my first baby, and has spent weeks searching for resources like books, podcasts, anything about parenting, told from the perspective of people with disability. I was so excited when this book came out, and I'm about halfway through the audiobook now. Given there is a severe lack of resources on this topic, I'd love to hear how each of you navigated finding this information in the lead up to or when you first became a parent. And that's a question from Heidi. Can anyone speak to this?
I wish this book did exist back then. That is one answer. So you're already one up on us. But it was really lovely to connect in with other people with disabilities who were a parent or were thinking about becoming parents. And social media has enabled that to a large extent. So connecting in with networks that exist on social media. And I managed to meet people who are now in this book. It's amazing how many people I met through becoming a parent, and then I get to read about their experience again in this book, because once you sort of put yourself out there, I think you find like-minded people and they come to you. And that happens with parenting in general. You're at the same stage in life, and I find that the people, a lot of the people I've stayed close with over the last 2 years have been parents or thinking about becoming parents. Whether and that goes for even adopting as well. That you've got something in common. So just talk to people would be my advice.
There is a really great Facebook group as well called Disabled Parenting Project. It's a worldwide Facebook group that I only found after having my kids, which is a real shame, but that's a great resource as well. What about you, Jax? Any tips?
No, not really. I mean, I'm similar to Sam in that I wished a book like this had been out there at that point. I managed to find some folks through my engagement with the disability community at the time. But yeah, there kind of hasn't been much. There hasn't been much that's allowed us to explore the joy in parenting, but also the hard parts as well, the difficult things that we might be grappling with just because we're parents and parenting is hard, but also with those additional things around disability and ableism and navigating that space, to have those kind of open conversations with each other, I think is a really valuable thing and a political thing, because we haven't ever kind of had this space to have these conversations before.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I'd say to Heidi is contact us, or me at least. But you know, if you've got any questions,
Yeah,
just
totally.
reach out to someone in the book that you can stalk.
All right, well, we are coming to an end. I just want to ask you a quick question, what you hope people will get out of this book. This is your final question.
I hope that they will, if they're disabled, I hope that they will find parts of stories or threads that mirror their own experience, that give them resilience and pride. I hope that they will be able to advocate for parenting supports in their life, either through NDIS or other means. And I hope that the non-disabled world will find points of connection too, but also feel challenged by some of it and challenge some of their assumptions and ideas. I hope that maternal child health nurses read it, and doctors and specialists, because particularly when you have a tiny baby, you know, they're some of the people that you're interacting with. They might be your only interactions in the first few months when you get out of the house and go to these appointments. So if they could have a deeper, more nuanced perspective of disability that wasn't just framed through a medical model discourse, I think that would make a huge difference for the, you know, 15% of parents with disabilities that I'm sure are coming through their doors. So yeah.
Oh my goodness, I can't believe we only mentioned child maternal health nurses at 6:01. We could go another hour, but yeah, it has to be split into the two, right? That people with disability find belonging, and people without disabilities can see themselves in it, really, and realize that some of the ways that parenting is set up at the moment and society is set up in a very stringent idea of what parenting is, aren't necessarily what we should be striving for.
Thank you so much to our panelists, Sam Drummond and Jacki Brown. Thank you also to our AUSLAN interpreters and to everyone that's joined us today. And I hope you all have a wonderful night. My name's Eliza Hull. Very proud to be here tonight and to speak about We've Got This. Thank you, everyone. I think we're just all say goodbye now. It's so funny in the virtual world, isn't it? All right. Thanks, everybody.
See you later.
Thanks, interpreters. Thanks, Jax. Thanks, Eliza.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Bye. Thank you.